Hey everybody, today we're going to be talking about the Path of Exile 2 campaign versus the late game maps. Like many of you, I very much enjoyed the campaign. I think my exact quote was, they might as well cease the development of any other ARPG that wasn't Path of Exile 2 because Path of Exile 2 was just so unbelievably much better that there was just no point to developing anything else at the time. Since then, I retract that statement. Path of Exile 2 late game is basically any other ARPG late game, not very notable at all, and is actually kind of forgettable in the grand scheme of things. Now, while you could say that that was due to the developers maybe not balancing it enough, not intending enough, it very, very much is an unavoidable truth that the developers very much intend the late game to be exactly this. I keep seeing comments from people saying things like, the developers didn't have enough time to work on it, it was untested, they'll slow it down, they'll fix it, they'll balance it, but that is not what the developers are saying. That is not what they are intending. And I'm making this video to form an argument to say that is a bad choice. You need to change the late game to what the vast majority of the player base wants. Now, in this dev diary, they say the complete opposite, and I will be going over a segment here because they unavoidably, they do say that yes, this is the late game they wanted, this is the late game they intended. And I want to go over that real quick because, well, I'll go over that later, but for now, let's go over this. Every single poll I have seen on every single stream, on every single Reddit post, everywhere, every post, everything I have seen, the majority of people say they want the endgame slowed down, and not by a little bit. It is always a majority, over 50%, and I have seen these polls go as far as 70 to even 80% of people want the late game slowed down. How much they want it slowed down and how many changes they want is up for debate. So I, on my community post, put up a very, very rigged poll. I deliberately put this poll up in this way to try to get the most people voting against slowing the late game down so that there could be no debate. Based on the choices I did and based on the exact wording I did this deliberately to make it as unappealing as possible to say that you want the late game slowed down. And despite that, people still said they want the late game slowed down. With over 700 votes on this poll, it seems pretty clear that people want the late game slowed down. So let's read this poll so you can see that I was as biased against myself as I could be. Everybody says, I want PoE2 maps slowed down like the campaign. With that in mind, would you accept the nerfs to your personal favorite class needed to slow down the late game in maps? I don't mean slower loot or slower progression, I mean slower gameplay, less focused on chain AoEing packs of enemies. This would include nerfs to damage, AoE size, CC, etc. On the monster side of things, we would presumably get less monster spam, less speed, less damage, and more HP on them. Okay. And then I said here, I'm doing this poll because I always say, because I'm doing this poll because it always says, okay, where did that word? I want this game slowed down, but people also tend to be unwilling to accept nerfs to get there. Nerfs are a word people hate. I love nerfs. I think nerfs are great for games. I think they increase the longevity of games. Nerfs are absolutely fantastic. But your average player does not like nerfs. I think they are very, very, very aggressive when it comes to them. They tend to think of gameplay concepts as in states. You know how there's states of matters, gas, solid, liquid. People tend to think of things in games as buffed, nerfed, or overpowered, right? And anything that has been nerfed is in this state, this state of nerfed. If something is nerfed, it can't be good because it was nerfed. Despite the fact that freeze has been nerfed twice, it is still completely dominant, but it was nerfed, therefore it's weaker. Well, that's not true. I love nerfs. But at any rate, even saying that you would have to be nerfed, people still said, I want the late game slowed down. So let's move on here to this video because I say a lot of things that I very much disagree with. Well, actually, before I even go there, let's I'm going to show you some gameplay footage real quick. I quickly went to one of the popular streams of someone playing Path of Exile 2. This is after a bunch of the changes they've done and after people have figured out builds. This is at 2x speed, by the way. Don't get me wrong. I'm just doing that so you can see it quicker. This is what the campaign and this is what the ender of the game starts to look like. As you start reaching maps and you start finishing up the campaign, this is what it looks like. Does this look like the campaign that you enjoyed? Does this look like the gameplay that you enjoyed? Does this look like the sort of things that you would play for long, long periods of times? Me, personally, no. If this is how the campaign was, if there wasn't this weird bait and switch, I probably would have stopped playing a long time ago. I don't really like this sort of gameplay. And I just want to show that to people because this very much is how the game is going to play in maps. This is very much how the game is going to play in late game, and the devs want and intend this. How do I know they want and intend this to be the sort of gameplay that you're using? Well, let's look right here. Darth Microtransactions asked a question, and I think he was the smartest man in the room. He was very prepared. He was very professional. I actually really liked that he was on here. If he ever happens to watch this video, like good job, my dude. Normally in these sorts of interviews and things like that, people come in woefully unprepared and just lob softball questions to kind of give fanfare to the game. But you actually asked a lot of things that I very much enjoyed. I think you were the smartest man in the room at this moment, or at the very least the most prepared. But let's listen to what was said here.
The game does take a bit of a turn suddenly when you get to endgame. Of like, it doesn't really feel like it. It really does feel very different from campaign to endgame. And yeah, as I said, it's just a matter of sort of easing that transition, making that a little bit better, and smoothing out that more for sure.
I want to hone into 2 points here. Because you talk about it feels like a different game, sort of a different sense of progression, at least. After you go from campaign into action. This is a question we're going to ask later, but it seems a good time to ask it now. Is that intended, and do you like that as a design principle? Because I've seen people say that they really like the campaign, and me myself, I like the difference, but I've seen people state that they really enjoy the campaign pacing, then they get to maps and they feel like it starts blasting, it's almost a different game at that point. So I think the audience would love to know how you feel about that difference.
And this is something very important to ask, and this is a question that I think more people should be talking about. He asked very directly, is this what you intend with the late game? Is this what you want in the late game? Is this your intended gameplay? Is this not a balance oversight, but instead, is this what you want people to be doing? Because again, I see people on Reddit, on Twitter, on Bluesky, on all these websites, they keep saying, well, the devs, they didn't intend this. They'll fix it. They'll change it, right? But they won't. This is what they want. Okay, and I just want to emphasize that because they very much do answer exactly as you think. The devs will answer this question. Is this what you want? And I have a whole list of problems with this, but I just want to get this baseline clarified so people can understand where I'm coming from and not go down to the comments and say, well, it's early access, the end game isn't in balance, they rushed it together. I want to give feedback to this that I do not like this, and I think the vast majority of people do not like this, but we need to set a base floor that we need to change the developer's opinion.
You do actually, I mean, you do need to get to the point at some point where you feel incredibly powerful.
I'm going to keep cutting this off to add something here, though. I find the developer opinion that you need to get to the point where you feel powerful very off-putting, weird, bad even. I never actually feel powerful in Path of Exile 2. Never. I never, ever, ever actually feel powerful. And it's really concerning that they keep talking about this player strength when I actually feel like I get weaker and weaker and weaker the further into the late game I become. In fact, once I start juicing maps and I start going into delirium and things like that, I don't feel stronger. I just start feeling weaker and weaker and weaker as time goes on. Now that's because of a lot of their balancing issues. Enemy health barely moves, whereas their damage starts doubling, then tripling, then quadrupling, which I will get into later. But a bigger issue is, I'm going to call it the Kamehameha effect. Okay. Now, when I'm going to use a Dragon Ball Z example here, and hopefully you guys can understand this. When Goku was fighting Vegeta, he shot a Kamehameha. A big beam came out and it shot out of the planet. Okay. When Goku was fighting Frieza, he shot a Kamehameha and a big beam came out and it shot out of the planet. But at this point, Goku was 300,000 power level versus the 10 to 8,000 he was on fighting Vegeta. I don't remember what it was. So it would have been 300,000 with the Kaioken times 20. So do the math on that one. Then when Goku got Super Saiyan and shot his Kamehameha at Frieza, he was 3 million power with Super Saiyan being a 50 times multiplier. So do the math on that one. Then when Goku was fighting Cell, he did a Kamehameha. And now this one was an instant transmission Kamehameha, but it still shot out of the planet. And do you get where I'm going with this? They're all the same thing. It's all just a Kamehameha. It doesn't matter what number you put on it. It's all just a Kamehameha. It doesn't matter if I'm AoEing 1 enemy, 2 enemies, 20 enemies, 50 enemies. If I'm fighting a breach and I'm starting to literally kill like 20 to 30 breach enemies every time I swing my hammer, all I'm doing is swinging my hammer. I'm just swinging this hammer. 10 enemies explode at the end of the campaign. 20 enemies explode when I get to the map. 30 enemies explode when I get to a breach. I don't feel more powerful. In fact, quite the opposite. I feel like my enemies are just becoming pathetic and weak. They're not getting strong. They're getting more and more pathetic as time goes on. I'm going to call this Diablo 1. Let's go all the way back to the beginning. What do you fight at the beginning of the game? Skeletons, zombies. What do you fight in the middle of the game? You start fighting some demons. What do you fight at the end of the game? I think it's called the Blood Knight. I'm going to Google this really quick. The Blood Knight, Diablo 1, what's it called? Blood Knight. You start fighting the Blood Knight at the end of the game. And you feel progression, you feel more powerful. Why? Because the Blood Knight can kick your ass. He can beat you. You don't just AoE 100 Blood Knights. You're not going from AoEing 10 zombies to 10 skeletons to 10 goblins to 10 demons to 10 Blood Knights. By the time you get to the Blood Knight is very, very, very powerful. And it takes a lot to overcome the Blood Knight. Do you get that? But in Path of Exile 2, I never feel like I'm getting more powerful. I'm just AoEing enemies. Now, there are lots of enemy types in the game, to be clear. Delirium has unique ones. Breach has so many unique ones. Breach is, if you actually could pay attention, if you stopped AoEing 30 enemies a second in Breach, you would notice that they have like 20 different types of enemies or something. It's like a lot. They also have bosses, mini bosses. It's actually kind of nutty in that one. So Delirium has unique ones. Breach has unique ones. Expeditions has a lot of different unique ones. There's all these different unique enemy types in the game, but you just AoE them all the same. What's the difference between AoEing zombies at the start of the game and AoEing the breach monsters at the end? Are you telling me the breach monsters are only as powerful as zombies? This is the big, great, world-ending terror? A bunch of enemies I can just easily AoE. I swing my hammer and they all go, he's so powerful, I'm dead now.
However, I would say that there is like a bit of a switch flip right now that's kind of not quite right. Like there's definitely something that ain't right going on there.
Well, there's two. There is the character power side. I mean, a lot of people are getting to endgame. Excuse me. A lot of people are getting to endgame and they aren't just becoming gods all of a sudden, right? A lot of people are struggling and falling off and can't sustain maps and are dying. And, it's not like you.
Can we talk about the sustaining maps, by the way? The problem with sustaining maps is if you ever die, you can't sustain maps. But I'm actually going to explain this to them really quick. Like, if any developer is ever watching this, let me explain why these maps, why do the developers have no issues sustaining maps, and then why do the players get issues sustaining maps? Let's take the boss map, for example. You go into the boss. There's one map. You kill the boss. So we were up 2 maps, right? So we're down 1 map. We get 2 maps. We're up 1 map by going to the boss. Okay, +1 by going to a boss. Sometimes you get 3, 4, 5 within it. Depending on how much you've juiced the map. Typically you get 3, I think by the end, you get like 3 automatically. So let's say by the end of the game, once you're at tier 15s and your maps are juiced and you're getting lots of waystones and all that, you go in, you're -1. You get 3 from the boss, you're +3. You typically get 1 from the map itself. You're +4, -1. So you're up 3 maps by going to a boss map. Easy to sustain going along and along and along, right? Okay, let's say you're bad at the game. You haven't been playing ARPGs for 30 years. You haven't min-maxed the build because you're the developer of the game and you understand how to play your own game. In that situation, you put a map in. You die. You put a second map in. Now you're down 1 map. But actually, you're not down 1 map. You're down 4 maps. Because you didn't get the 3 from the boss. You didn't get the 1 from the map itself because you died and had to put in a second map. Maybe you didn't even get a map from the boss. So the problem is, map sustain is directly attributed to how overpowered your build is. If your build is very overpowered, then you can sustain maps easy. And I just want to say that it's like a bit of a non sequitur. I promise you guys, I have a whole ass list of complaints I'm going to go over, but I want to go over this video first.
You get to endgame and all of a sudden you're ultra powerful. But a lot of people are getting to endgame and then are just lost as to what to do. Right? Like a lot of players really like to be told exactly, here's what you do, here's what you do, here's what you do, here's your next objective, here's the thing to look forward to. And something just like complete 10 tier 1 maps is not a fun objective, right? That's just like, okay, sure, I'll do that.
So I do want to clarify here that they're not really addressing the issues, and they will never address the issues that a lot of people have. Just off the top of my head, utility abilities become useless. Endgame enemies are way too aggressive, fast, and spawn next to you way too quickly for you to possibly use any sort of CC or utility ability. So you just AoE blast enemies. Enemies do way too much damage for defensive abilities or, that sort of thing. So you can't really do that. So basically, once you get to the end game, the only thing you can really do is just blast as many AoEs as you can, and that's it. And a lot of people get really off-put by that because they maybe played through the campaign with a tankier build, or they played through the campaign with a more utility build, a combo build, a CC-oriented build, and they get to the end game, and all you can do is AoE enemies. If you go with the CC build and you open a ritual, you're going to have a real rude awakening for just how the end game is. And they never address that fact. And I do want to emphasize this as well. I don't know if they realize this. I barely played Path of Exile 1. I just want to clarify, I did back it. I got in on the original, all that stuff. I still have my original email and all that if you guys want me to prove it or whatever. So I was very much into Path of Exile 1, but I found that it differentiated way too much from Diablo 2 and seemed to be made a game entirely for people who like to min-max the game and not a game made for people who just like to kind of play through the campaign and take it slow and have a fun build, right? And Path of Exile 2, when we looked at all the gameplay videos, and maybe I should have shown that, the developer showcase with like the Sony president and all that, you guys can probably go remember that. They talked about how you would need to combo abilities and it would be slower and all that. And I feel like that was kind of a bait and switch. I feel like it's kind of a dirty term to say and people don't like hearing that said, but I do feel like it was a bit of a bait and switch that they basically promised, guys, this is not Path of Exile 1, and then here's Path of Exile 1. But let's go into that real quick. This is all me saying, to clarify, I didn't play Path of Exile 1 once all these league mechanics were added. I don't know what Breach is, I don't know what Delirium is, I don't know what rituals are, I don't know any of this stuff. In the game itself, you will not find tooltips for any of this. You will not find explanations for any of this. I didn't understand I could anoint my necklace. I didn't understand what quality was from breaches. I barely understood what breach rings were really doing that was unique or anything. I didn't understand the objective behind breaches. I didn't know what you were doing in them. I barely understand the objective behind Delirium. I'm pretty much picking that stuff up now. I'm pretty much clear on rituals because they had them in the campaign, but a lot of these people are lost because at the end of the day, they never understood that the campaign was going to become, well, that. And also, there's no, like, bro, you didn't tell us what to do.
You know, where we could do that a lot better, right? Go to this place, travel here, do this exact thing, discover this, do a tower, run this breach, you know, all these things we can have obviously way better objectives and ones that we could still design. And you're getting your passive points for each, and you're like, okay, the next thing it wants me to do is this exact thing, not just, I've completed my now it just wants me to complete tier 2 maps. I see.
So once again, they're not addressing the issue that the campaign plays one way, the end game plays a completely different way, and they're very different. And additionally, they're not, and this is a huge complaint for me, they don't describe how to do any of this. When I started to get into the end game, I obviously was like just streaming this every day, and it was very confusing to me why every other player was just like 3, then 4, then 5, then 10, then a week of progression ahead of me, until I realized, oh, there's like all these mechanics the game literally never told you to do that can like massively increase your player power very, very quickly. Even things like increasing item rarity, increasing currency drops, that doesn't make sense to me. For a game that has so many tooltips and so many descriptions, it never tells you that bosses are going to do overpower attacks and crush your armor and make that useless, right? It's weird to me.
I'll just keep going, sure. So there's no like, whereas the campaign's very story is like, go kill this boss, get here, and you got NPCs talking to you and everything, and then all of a sudden it's just, now I'm killing stuff, ticking up this ticker, and, you know, a lot of people probably aren't really getting into, based on the tutorialization, they're not really getting into the towers, the tablets, all of that stuff. And then they're just also possibly finding it a bit too hard and they're dying. And so, yeah, it's not as friendly to the people who, especially non-PoE1 players, it's not as friendly to them as we would want it to be at all. That being said, like, obviously, there is also the capacity at that point to just be like, all right, I'm going to change my build to do this or go do this. And now I'm just like obliterating everything everywhere. And you don't have all those like story events breaking up your flow of gameplay. It's just like map, kill everything, map, kill everything, map, kill everything, which people love.
But okay, do you notice how he said which people love? They don't. And I needed to get him to say that. I needed that entire statement to be said. People do not love that. And I want to emphasize this a lot. People do not love that. On average, people do not love that. Developers, you are incorrect. I don't know who you're polling. I don't know where your data is, but you are wrong. Now, I do have a bunch of statements I was going to go into here a bit later, but let's go into a few of them right now. Players generally prefer campaign. I think if you polled your average player who played Path of Exile 2, not your average person who watches hardcore best build videos, not your dude who watches streams of, I don't know, just AoEing every map for 10 hours straight while nothing's said, with no room, with no light or anything like that. But your average player, in every poll I have seen, prefers campaign. Now, as we saw with that video over there, the campaign has already been made easier. For many of you who only have 1 hour to play a day, and for those of you who do only have 1 hour to play a day, you are maybe finishing the campaign right now. A lot of these people like this, you don't realize that a lot of these good reviews, a lot of these people talking up the campaign, a lot of these people hyping this shit up are still in the campaign. They are finishing the campaign, they are maybe getting into maps, and then they're dropping the game. Campaign has already been made easier. Multiple buffs to item drop rates, multiple nerfs to enemy types and some bosses, and it is unlikely to get the developer addressing it ever making it harder again. Okay, I saw this a lot. One of the problems is what the developers will never really do is make the campaign harder, and worse than that, the campaign at launch was just hard enough that you had to actually go into those ARPG mechanics, the fun ones that a lot of people like rolling new items, gambling, trying to pick up every item, turn it into a magic one, finding good stuff. Like, you had to do all these things to get to be strong. The increase to item drop rates alone substantially reduce the difficulty of the game. It is obviously a item game. It is fundamentally. When you give people more rares, when you double or even triple the amount of rares in the game, I think people have suspected the amount of rares you get in the early game went up by about triple. When you do that, the campaign becomes substantially easier. I played through the campaign again on a monk without using any abilities, anything at all, just using items I found on the ground. I was able to hold left click on every boss except for about one in Act 1. Didn't dodge, nothing. Sat in front of him, popping health potions, holding left click, and I beat every single boss in Act 1. It was kind of funny, but it's also kind of sad that they have already dumbed down the game that much from the game that people enjoyed. Endgame maps see a dramatic fall off in player base. I will finish the rest of this video later. I just want to go with this right here. Endgame maps see a dramatic fall off in player base. This is inarguable. This has always been true. PoE1 proves that endgame maps are not interesting for players. PoE1 loses 60 to 70% of its player base within 1 month of a season. Nobody seems interested in playing without a forced reset. PoE1 has almost no lasting appeal when new content isn't being released. All these statements I just said are true. They might anger you, they might make you upset, but they are all true. Nobody plays Path of Exile 1. It is a very low played game for a supposed AAA game, for supposed one of the best ARPGs of all time. It has currently less than 1/5 of the concurrent player base that Diablo 2 has. Diablo 2. Now, don't take my word for it. Let's look into this right here. We can see almost nobody plays this game when there is not a forced reset. That is true. You can just see this. You can argue why or how that is, but you cannot argue that it is. When there is not a forced reset, the player base dips down substantially. And I don't think when we look at the charts like that, you don't realize just how much the player base dips down. On any one of these random seasons, you can see right here, the player base goes down below 20,000 between almost every season. Without new content being promised, without new content being released, the player base goes very, very, very low. We have a 24-hour peak of 8,000. Once again, that is less than 1/5 of Diablo 2's from the stats that I've seen. This is all true. They lose 60 to 70% of their player base within 1 month of a season. Once again, we can see here 168,000, and then when is that? December 4th. So once we look at January 1st to 3rd, we can see it's about 80,000. So once again, they lost slightly over 50% of their player base on that month. On this month, we have 165,000 on August there. When we look at September, we are once again looking, this one lost about 70% of its player base. No matter how you argue it, no matter how you look at it, the stats are here. We can see them. Steam released them. PoE1 loses about 60 to 70%. I'm going to keep emphasizing this because I want this to hurt to read. PoE1 loses 60 to 70% of their player base within 1 month of a season. Almost nobody seems interested in playing without a forced reset, and it has almost no lasting appeal when new content isn't being released. This is not a darling game that is appreciated by everyone and everyone is liking it and it's amongst the greatest games ever released ever. Just to drive home my point, let's talk about a game that does not get new content. Let's talk about a game that is just sitting there forever. So here's Elden Ring. Let's look at Elden Ring, Max. Here's the DLC, and then here's the player base. And then let's actually shrink this to when it had no new content being released right here. And we can see just through here that the player base, although it kind of goes up when the expansion is going around and it kind of goes up and down near patches, Elden Ring, despite getting no new content, has a dramatically larger player base than Path of Exile 2. Even after this expansion and after it goes down, we still have not nearly reached the numbers of Path of Exile 1. We can see that right clear. In fact, one of my favorite games, EU4. EU4, let's look at this one. I wanted to show you guys this one. EU4's last expansion was on May, and the game literally stopped being developed at this point. Was it May? I just want to double check this, just so I'm not talking about my ass. So I need to like make sure everything I say is correct. Yes, May 8th was its last expansion. So May 8th, and do you notice how despite getting no developments, despite getting nothing new, the game is just now sitting here in stasis after, what was that? 12 years of development, the game stopped. And after 12 years of development, the game's player base, everyone's still enjoying the game, everyone's still playing it. Do you guys see that? But when Path of Exile doesn't get new content, nobody plays it. Even now, if people are saying, well, Path of Exile 1 is way better than Path of Exile 2, then where are the people playing it? You can see people started playing it in anticipation for Path of Exile 2, and here's the funny thing, despite Path of Exile 2 coming out and supposedly being in a rough state and being so much worse than Path of Exile 1 in the late game, Path of Exile 1 continues to go down in player count. People do not enjoy playing this game, unfortunately, without content. At the current rate it's going, it will likely be under 5,000 people playing it in a couple months. This game, I'm sorry to have to rip this band-aid off for you guys, it does not seem to have lasting appeal.
Yes, for those who know how to do that, that happens too soon. And for those who don't know how to do it, they're like getting stuck in a hole and finding themselves very lost. So yeah, 2 sets of improvements. The people that are going to obliterate everything, they're going to have their fun no matter what. They'll get there a bit later, sure. If that
fun, he says that again, it frustrates me a lot. Fun, the only thing you think is fun is obliterating the map? Because that gets boring to me. That's fun like once, a few times. Maybe if there were dedicated maps to obliterating the map, that would be fun every so often. Like every game has that one section where you fight the low tier enemies and you just beat the crap out of them. But like if you make your entire game about fun of having no challenge and AoEing every enemy effortlessly, then it ceases to be fun. If that's your entire game, then this will be your player count once there's no new content, because it's not fun after a while. There's no challenge. There's nothing there. Do you want this to be your player count where people go back and play the game and buy it on sale and have fun with it? Or do you want this to be your player count where people generally enjoyed the game and continue to play with no new content? Or do you want this to be your player count where no new content comes out and everyone just ditches it? Okay. I just have to say that.
That's how you want to think about it. But it's way more important to not just have that like very much narrative driven change in pace where all of a sudden it's just like, and it's gone. And now you're just doing, you know, kind of random stuff. You know, what am I supposed to do next kind of thing? And yeah. So yeah, there's a lot going wrong there. More content would do it, more time on it, more quests, more, you know. But again, PoE1 had a lot of this stuff and it had so many different.
Here's the issue. If PoE1 had a lot more of this stuff, and it was actually fun to blast maps over and over again and have no challenging content and just AoE map, AoE map, AoE map, if that was so fun and enjoyable, then it would maintain its player base for longer. The fact that so many people finish up the campaign and immediately quit in Path of Exile 1 is telling. And that's not just me saying that. It's right here. We can see it. I have the receipts in front of me. I can see the proof that people do not continue to play once they are, quote, blasting maps over and over again. They quit. They do not play the game. You are catering. Okay, let me put it this way in the most blunt way possible. The developers very much seem to be catering to this 10% of the players down here who continue to play through the seasons, and not these 100% players here who come back to enjoy the game over and over again. These players seem to keep getting forgotten, and these players seem to be getting catered exclusively to. Even when these players are saying, hey man, we would enjoy more of this type of content, the developers say, oh, but these players enjoy that type of content, so that's all we're going to give them. That's a problem. That's obviously a problem.
Axes. If you didn't like one thing, you could do another. If you didn't like that, you could do another, and you could do certain things earlier or later. And we just need to get to that point where there's just more better, without overcomplicating everything.
But that's a problem. Having more builds. I'm going to keep showing this because I want it to feel painful to look at it. Having more builds is not keeping your player base, because they're all boring to play. They're all just AoE mashers. Having more ways to AoE mash enemies does not keep your players, because you're just AoE mashing them. Having more expedition, ritual, breach, whatever you call them in Path of Exile 1. I'm sure there's like 5 more ways to AoE enemies, aren't there? Like 10 more, in fact, probably, if I had to guess. I don't even care what enemy types are. Are they demons, monsters, relic? I don't even know what I'm AoEing in expeditions. I literally don't know. Like a relic thing? Are they like a demon? Were they summoned? What's my attachment? What special abilities do they do? I know one of them kind of summons a cool sword, but he gets AoE just like the others. So what does it really matter? No, you're wrong. You are factually incorrect. Your player base is not sticking around just because you added a new weapon. They're playing through with that weapon once, getting bored and quitting until you forcefully reset them. If you are not forcefully resetting them, they don't play. You're not. If the entire intent is to continue to forcefully reset your players so they come back to the start of the season, you are already doing that. If your intent is to keep the late game interesting so players continue to play into a season, you are not doing that. You're describing 2 different objectives. Objective 1 is get people back at the start of the season. You are doing that. You are doing that great. I'm not arguing with that. That is wonderful. You are doing better than anyone I've ever seen. It's actually insane how well you're doing that. If you're talking about keeping people playing the game, you are failing spectacularly. You are falling on your face, and you need someone to tell you that.
So my last follow-up to this in-game topic, and I'll send over the guys to continue the conversation elsewhere. So you mentioned that there's a little bit of a separation from what I'm hearing about people that like know how to blast, like they're going to go anyway, right? They're going to crush through and destroy it. Then you have the people that are like kind of learning the game, getting into the end game, that might like get stuck and lost. How do you feel about the, one poor though, then now that the game has been out a while?
Good question, but that's not what my video is going to focus on. Let's focus on other things. To the untrained eye, Diablo 4 and Path of Exile 2 have these same late game mechanics. Juice maps, clear rares, do it again. But apparently, Diablo 4 is bad and Path of Exile 2 is good. Now you can say we have different ways to do it. There's not just juicing maps, there's expeditions, there's, I don't even know, I'm sure I've heard some people talk about like heists, shit like that. I don't even know. But like to the untrained eye, to me, I played Diablo 4, got really bored of it and dropped it. I played this game and get to the late game, I'm bored of it less quickly. I think it's a more well-made game than Diablo 4 for sure, right? It's like I got 2 types of cars. This car is obviously more well-constructed. It's got more durability, okay? It's gonna keep me safer. It's a better car, right? But like there's 2 cars. They're the same model, not even model. You know what I'm trying to say. You know what I'm trying to say here, right? I don't understand why some people, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills sometime, and I mean this in the exact Zoolander reference. They're the same thing. You juice a map, you go in, you AoE a bunch of enemies, find the rares, kill them, go to the next map. Juice a map, kill a bunch of enemies, AoE them all, nothing challenges you. Yeah, sure, Diablo 4 the bosses that were so fucking easy that I'm not even going to call them bosses. It does not matter. So at the end of the day, my question is, why is Diablo 4 good? Or why is Diablo 4 bad and Path of Exile 2 is good? Because it surely isn't the itemization, considering 90% itemization in Path of Exile 2 is get more health, get more resistance. There's 90% of what you're doing with your itemization. Okay, let's move on to the next topic here. Claims that rerunning the campaign is boring is claims that rerunning the campaign is boring are based on nothing. I see this all the time. I see this listed constantly. Rerunning the campaign would be boring. Surely you don't want me to do that. Based on what? Could anyone cite me a source on this? I looked. Trust me. For making this video, I looked. Not only can I find claims to the complete contrary, not only can I find a shitload of people who play through the campaign and then quit the game, not only can I find the developers talking. I didn't think it was proof, mind you, but I could find the developers talking that they wanted to get people into maps because they couldn't get enough of their player base into maps. So I have found proof. I don't know if it's like... I don't know if I want to cite it, so like I didn't list it here, but we did find some proof, at the very least I did, that no, unfortunately, people do not find rerunning the campaign boring, and the claims that that's true are based on nothing. Diablo 2 is cited as still having 50,000 concurrent players. Path of Exile 1 peaks today at 8.4 thousand. Seriously, there's no source for this claim. I literally can't find anything to back up this claim. And for people who go, but in Diablo 4, no, but again, Diablo 2, if you guys actually played it back in the day, if you're actually old enough to remember, your account used to get wiped if you hadn't played it in 3 months. So what did you do? You did kind of what leagues are now. In fact, I think this is literally what leagues are based on. I'm going to call myself a archaeological forensic specialist here, because way back in the day, Diablo 2 would literally wipe your account if you hadn't played in 3 months. You might say that's unfair. You might say it's stupid. You might say it's a bad system. I'm pretty sure they eventually got rid of it, but that's what used to happen. So you would go play Diablo 2, max out your character, play through the campaign all the times, play another character, quit for 3 months, you'd come back, oh no, my character's wiped. Well, time to roll Necromancer again, do it again. 3 months later, oh no, my character is wiped. Oh, I didn't log in. Roll another Necromancer. Oh no, 3 months later, your character is wiped. Roll a Necromancer. Do you get it? Okay. And I want to ask anyone, could anyone please cite any source, any data, anything showing where endgame maps are the reason why people play the game? Because I can't find anything to back up that claim. Okay. Unchallenging content is boring. All enemies explode in a map-wide AoE. Skeletons, zombies, Hell Knights, Vampire Lords all get AoE'd in one hit. There's no sense of progression, there's no challenge, there's nothing. Additionally, saying that you only feel progression, you only feel like a god, you only feel powerful if you can AoE all your enemies, also has no basis in reality that I know of. Once again, we can go back to Elden Ring, where you start the game being beat down by one boss, you end the game being beat down by one boss, you start the game and 1 enemy, 2 enemies, 3 enemies jumping on you as a challenge. At the end of the game, hey, guess what? 3 enemies jumping on you is a challenge. In fact, if you want to see a game where becoming, I don't even know, I'm trying to think here, what game is there like a sense of progression that is like this, where nothing is challenging after a while? I literally can't think of any game with that sort of progression where eventually nothing becomes challenging. In fact, even if we look at Baldur's Gate 3, where the end of the game, the enemies continue to level, and maybe if you've like min-maxed your build, the game's going to be easy. I'll admit, honor mode kind of, removes a lot of the difficulty, but even games like Baldur's Gate 3, with very little content drops, have managed to maintain very high player bases, despite the supposed lack of scaling feeling, because I guess early in the game you're fighting goblins, and at the end of the game you're fighting the Vampire Lord, so then I don't feel progression because I'm fighting one Vampire Lord and a couple you know what I mean? Like, I don't understand this. Like, it's like my brain is frazzled because I can't understand this. Enemies with unique mechanics get AoE'd before you see them, so the content continues to become unchallenging because every enemy who could do something cool, the specters or wraiths or the stealthy dudes who fly behind you and try to freeze you, they could be cool and interesting, but they get AoE'd before they could do anything. And, worse yet, enemies with unique mechanics are already getting nerfed to not challenge the player. While off-map Meteor Dude is very frustrating, and yes, he's bullshit, and yes, he should get nerfed, they're nerfing him so he has to walk real close to you, and then he's dead already. He's been dead for 5 seconds. There's absolutely no way anyone dies to Meteor Man again, because every time he walks up to try to drop the meteor on you, he's just going to get AoE down. Every enemy is the same. You walk up, you press your kill button, and everything dies. Okay, let's talk about some issues in the late game that are really kind of ruining it for me. All league mechanics are unfair. Delirium, Breach, and Ritual are all massively unfair to the player. All spam enemies typically already in melee with you, unable to be kited. All spam such outrageous amounts of enemies, only AoE masher builds can stop them. There's no playstyle variety or diversity, no playstyle variety or diversity is applicable to fighting them. You can only AoE mash. Once we get into the late game, once again, all these utility abilities, all these CC abilities, all these cool abilities, combo abilities, they get out of the way because I cannot combo enemies if I'm expected on Delirium and Breach and Ritual, the 3 big late game mechanics, if all 3 of them are expecting me to AoE 10 to 20 enemies a second, and they're all spawning already in melee with me, and they're doing massive damage, I have one build that is viable. One. There's no build diversity. Despite claims to the contrary, Path of Exile 2 has no build diversity. None. You AoE enemies or you AoE enemies. That's it. That's the only thing you can do. In games like Baldur's Gate 3, we have actual build diversity. We have CC-based characters. We have AoE-based characters. We have damage-based characters. We have healing-based characters, buff-based characters. In this game, we have the AoE masher with a mace, the AoE masher. Eventually, we'll get the AoE masher with a sword. Is anyone looking forward to playing AoE masher with an axe? Ooh, that'll be interesting. Maybe we could play AoE masher that turns into a bear. Maps become very tedious. This is very much feedback to the developers. AoE spam every map is your only playstyle. Rares have too many AoEs and random bullshit, so you one-shot them from range. Most juicing just giga juices damage, so just one-shot them from range. By that I mean, most of the juicing doesn't make enemies use new abilities or do combos or have different weaknesses. Maybe they get double health, but when you armor break them or stun them in some way, they take half their health and damage. Ooh, so none of that. It's just the enemy now gets 20 billion times more elemental damage, and your elemental resists are reduced, and the enemies get elemental penetration, and you take more elemental damage, and they do another different type of elemental damage, and they do chaos damage, and like that's it. That's like 90% of the juicing. So they just giga juice to one-shot you, so you just one-shot them from range. So much for my power fantasy for being tanky. Apparently, and I'll go to this later, my only power fantasy allowed is to one-shot people from range. Ugh. Most difficult enemies are just unfair one-shots, so you one-shot them from range. Once again, Mr. Meteor Man one-shots you from range. So what do? One-shot him back. Mr. Corpse Explosion, well, he one-shots you from range. So what do? One-shot him back. Most enemies get ludicrous speed boosts, wherein even if you were to try to cast some sort of CC ability, they would actually run up real quick to you, right next to you, and attack you before you could really even pull it off. So you just one-shot them from range. Defenses do not nearly keep up with damage. You'll never believe this, so you just one-shot them from range. Wow. The vast diversity of one-shot every enemy before you interact with it. I don't know how the campaign became that. I feel like 2 different dev teams must have worked on this game. Bosses are unfair to die to, and I want to specify that. Bosses are fair. Most of their mechanics are telegraphed. Most of their mechanics are fair. Not all of them, but I wager like 95% of them. I don't think that bosses are unfair from like, bosses no fair. That's what I'm saying. I mean, bosses are unfair to die to. Bosses get wildly different damage and even abilities at higher difficulty. So you one-shot them from range. I could fight a boss one time and easily tank through his attacks, but another time, just some wacky map modifier gave him ludicrous damage, so he one-shot me. So I just one-shot him from range better than he can do it to me. You rarely fight bosses and forget the fights, so you can get one-shot by those attacks and combos that you forgot about. For example, the Hyena Lord has an attack where he'll shoot a ranged projectile at you, then start shooting one, delay it for a bit, and then shoot it at you. Well, on difficulty 4, that ability does like 10 gorillion damage. So I got one shot by it, tried it again, dodged the first one, dodged the second one, third one was delayed, dodge rolled, and then he immediately hit me. So I died. So then I tried him the third time and I actually learned the technique. And then I realized, wait, why don't I just run up to him directly in melee, do so much damage that he gets stunned, and then I'll just kill him before the stun is over. Best way to fight any boss. One shot them from range. Bosses start to get silly, unstunnable phases that can bait you into death, so you one-shot them from range. By this I mean, there are a lot of bosses that will start their special technique, and the devs are like, no, don't stun him, let him do his super cool one-shot attack. I don't think even the Elden Ring developers did that, did they? I mean, they got like stun resistance during their abilities. Yeah, so actually, no, the Elden Ring developers did do that. Never mind. Everything bad comes from Elden Ring, doesn't it? So you start getting these like phases where like a boss cannot be stunned. They'll start doing their special technique and they'll be like, ha! And all of a sudden, even though you have them at 99% stun, you try to hit that last little bit, realize they're immune to stun, and you get hit and die. So you one-shot them from range. Bosses can get random juices from maps that throw you off, so you one-shot them from range, such as skill speed, such as they get a slowing aura around them that makes your attack slower, such as little AoEs could pop out from them, so all of a sudden what you thought were safe points aren't actually safe anymore. The lightning strikes are notorious for this, so you one-shot them from range. And as I mentioned earlier, bosses are the primary way to fill your maps back up, so you one-shot them from range. Have you noticed the problem yet? Every solution to every single problem in the game right now is to one-shot every single enemy from range, which goes into this problem. The power fantasy is currently extremely limited to one playstyle. Only one type of player gets to have a power fantasy, the AoE spammer. Everyone else apparently does not get to have their power fantasy. AoE spam is apparently the only power fantasy that the devs can think of. Being tanky isn't allowed because it would make the game too easy. But one-shotting enemies is totally fair. AoEing enemies with big damage is meaningless because all enemies die easy. Once again, what does it matter if I'm AoEing a skeleton, a zombie, a goblin, a demon, a blood knight, the vampire lord, Diablo himself? They're all dying in one hit. So what does it matter? I don't feel better. They're all dying in one hit. If there was a map where the enemy pack count was reduced by like 80%, so instead of waves of zombies... Let me try that again. So instead of waves of zombies coming at me, it was like a couple blood knights, and the blood knights were really tanky and tough to beat. That would be interesting. That would diversify my gameplay. But apparently, that would, that wouldn't be the power fantasy. The one power fantasy we're allowed to have. AoEing everything overshadows everything so hard that nothing else matters. AoE mashing is currently what I'm going to call the stealth archer. Every build you do is going to be an AoE masher. No matter how you start your build, no matter what you're trying to do with your build, you will eventually become an AoE masher. Do you want to be really tanky? Nope, AoE masher. Do you want to heal a lot? Nope, AoE masher. Do you want to CC every enemy and slowly whittle? Nope, AoE masher. Do you want to put dots on enemies and then maybe stun them? Nope, AoE masher. Every build becomes an AoE masher. It is the stealth archer of Path of Exile 2, unfortunately. An extremely boring meta persists because of no nerfs. Now, I don't just mean good builds. I don't just mean, you found a good build, let's go nerf it. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean the extremely overpowered game-breaking builds. Because the developers do not want to nerf, because the players throw temper tantrums whenever there is a nerf, an extremely boring meta persists. The best items come from bosses with one try. So what do? You go with the best build that can one-shot the boss so that you don't lose your resources getting those bosses. Then you get the items off your little loot fountain for free. You go and you kill the hardest bosses in the game with your one-shot overpowered broken build. Kind of completely circumvents the entire challenge, floods the market with what should be extremely good items, and generally makes the game way more boring. It is 2025. People just Google best build. Now, while a lot of YouTube videos will clickbait for it, most of the time you can find completely broken builds that make the game Giga Mega Easy Mode. And everyone will take that build and they will take it for themselves, and they will be cheated out of a challenging content. They will be cheated out of having any fun because all they will do is AoE mash the enemy for a few days, and then they're going to quit. They're going to AoE mash, they're going to go, yay, fun build, yay, wee, and then they're going to quit. So, yeah. The best builds persist for an entire season, easy moding the game. When the game is easy mode, people quit. I literally saw a comment. I was reading through some Path of Exile 1 posts because I wanted to kind of get their feelings on all things. And I saw someone said, oh yeah, after I buy my best in slot item, I typically quit the next day or two because I get bored with the game. And people would literally say comments like that and then be like, But no, the game definitely should be easy mode. I don't get it. Like, how do you have an opinion where you definitely quit the game once it gets too easy, but also the game should also be really easy so you can quit really early? Do you want to play the game or not? The economy gets completely wrecked by broken builds, farming the game with no risk. Now, I understand a lot of people are like, no, don't nerf me. Okay, I get that. But if we're trying to have a challenging game like Path of Exile 2, if we're trying to have a challenging game with difficult bosses that drop good loot, a challenging late game and all that, we can't just let builds that are completely out of line, and there should be a line. The devs should put a line in the sand. It should take 1 to 3 minutes to kill a boss. If you kill him in 1 minute, you should be very squishy, and you should be at very much risk of dying. If you kill him in 3 minutes, you should be very tanky, and you should have a low risk of dying. Now, maybe that means everyone goes with a tanky build, but you get the idea, right? They should put that line in the sand, and they should say, unless you outgear the boss, unless you outlevel the boss, here's our line. And if people are breaking that line, they have to put their foot down, and they need to stop that. Okay. Devs, and this is why I kind of settle this for those of you who disagree with nerfs. The devs try to balance against the best builds, you know they do, making the game feel like ass. Because the best builds are so broken, the devs need to balance against it to try to keep some challenge into those builds, so then the game feels like ass. Because the devs try to kill the best builds with bullshit. The late game is nothing but bullshit to try to kill people who are playing AoE spark spam shit, which makes it feel awful for everyone else. There are so many death explosions, AoE spam, off-map attacks. The devs will try any single way to kill a player who can just screen wipe every single mob in the game. It makes me wonder, were the league mechanics designed like this to try to kill builds like that? Because I can think of no other way that every single league mechanic becomes about spawning waves of enemies directly on top of you that you can't AoE before they reach you. The only way they would do that is if they were balancing the game on these bullshit builds. But is that fun? Is that interesting? No, of course not. The game becomes significantly less interesting once you realize everything's out the window. It's about holding left click for as long as you can. And then you hold that left click button, and your eyes glaze over, and you go, yay, AoE, loot. But none of your loot is good. Of course it's not, because if your loot was good, you'd quit the game, which the devs have said, which is why loot is bad. Okay, so I guess when the best builds screen wipe every 1 second, you have to balance like this. Yes, it's really not fun playing off meta right now. I don't know if you guys have noticed this. Go to late game maps. Developers, please, I beg you, go to late game maps, play some off meta build. I implore you, I beg of you, go to late game maps and play an off meta build. You will very, very quickly hate it. It is very much not fun. Playing an off meta build without energy shield, without an AoE ability that can clear the entire screen and beyond every 1 second, playing even an underpowered build, you will have no fun. I've tried a lot of them. They are not fun. You get to maps and you don't want to play anymore. That's the best way to describe it. You get to maps and you go, yeah, fuck that. And that's it. That is PoE2 campaign versus maps. To finish with this thought for a second, because Darth Microtransactions, you are a very smart man, and this is a very good question. Let's look at the answer to that, because this kind of goes into devs try to kill the best builds with bullshit.
Right, they're going to crush through and destroy it. Then you have the people that are like kind of learning the game, getting into the end game, that might like get stuck and lost. How do you feel about the, one pour though? Then now that the game has been out of the wild, does the one pour though feel like it's widening that gap and punishing players who maybe are learning the game too much? But it's the people who are going to blast regardless. It doesn't matter because they're not going to be dying consistently in maps. So how do you feel about one pour though state of mapping currently, as well as XP loss still being fairly significant, even though in the previous interview was stated that you don't feel like you need to have the XP loss as much, considering you do have that one pour though defense. Right. We're in a state where we currently have both of them.
So first of all, we did discuss quite a lot about whether or not we want to go back on one portal or not, and I think that it comes down to the fact that
Yeah, okay. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, everybody. Give me your thoughts. Give me your feelings. Please like and subscribe. And as always, I hope you all have a great rest of your day.